So this is the original by Tom Hoffman that I'm going to copy, and before I do any painting, whether it's mine or someone else's, I want to have a bit of a plan on how I'm going to approach it. Now in the book, Tom gives us a few clues. He explains a little bit about this painting, and mostly he talks about that this shape here, creates the depth because of its contrast with the background and the hard edge by the shadow, and mentions that he put this big shadow in here, this shape, after the hill was painted in the first wash, which seems fairly obvious. A couple of things you want to look out for when you want to reverse engineer a painting is where the soft and the hard edges are. So this is the soft edge here, which means that the sky and this background hill was put in at the same time. And then he painted the entire hill in the one color, in that lighter color. And then once that was dry, the shadow was put in. And we can also see some soft edges here and in this green bit, which mean we paint this landmass here and then drop in some greens in the first layer and then let that dry. Where hard edges and soft edges are will tell you what's wet and wet and what has been put in at a later stage when it was completely dry in most cases. And you can, for example, see here that the blue was painted first and then these shadows are put in almost wet and wet because there is some fuzzing going on here. So hard and soft edges will tell you a lot about the sequence of layers. Well, let's get into the painting. So with this plan in mind, I'm going to get cracking with my sky. I'm going to speed this up significantly. It's a pretty simple painting. I'm sure you can follow even at that speed. And as said, I'm going to put the lighter hill in a straight after the sky, and don't mind that the two will blend a little bit into it and create a soft edge. For that middle ground hill there, I'm going to add a bit of yellow, make it a little bit warmer, a little bit more punchier, and then at the background hill, and then strengthen the top of the ridge. I'm not going to list out all the colors, but this lighter color is my raw sienna that I'm using for most of the hills. And strengthen it and darken it a bit with a burnt umber, which is this color there that I've also used in the bottom left corner. And I'm dropping those in while the hill is still wet, again for soft edges and texture. And as explained at the beginning, also dropping in some of the green for where the trees are going to go, just so that we have a base that can bleed a little bit before we cut around it with darker colors. And then I'm going to drop in a stronger green, so made from blue and yellow. And then let that completely dry. And the next part will be the river. I'm going to do that before I paint the shadow on that back hill. So I want to get the river in. And that's just a mid-value blue, because we're going to drop in some reflections and also paint a shadow over the top. So this first blue of the river can't be too dark. But I'm going to drop in a few streaks just to get some texture into the river. This is what Tom is so good at, is those expressive brush marks, which we have practiced in previous newsletters. And while the river still has some dampness in it, I'm going to drop in the reflections straight away, and I'm going to make them a little bit darker. I'm not 100% following my reference. I'm not aiming to make an exact copy or a forgery of this. I'm just using it as an inspiration to get into someone else's mind and process and learn from it. Now that the background hill is bone dry, I'm going to come in over the top with my shadows. This is a blue mixed from ultramarine and a bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of magenta, and making sure that I vary the color here and there. To be honest, I made it too dark. You can see that in the original painting, that background hill has still got a lot of translucency in it and a lot of texture. I made it a bit too dark. It got a bit too dead. So that is something I would improve. So here I'm trying to lift out a little bit of the pigment because I'm realizing this is probably going to dry too dark and won't give me enough of the texture that he's got in there. Add some trees to the ridge. And dropping in some darker greens as well while the shadow is wet. So again, they're quite soft and fluffy. But I am not going to match the background hill to the level of expertise that Tom Hoffman did. But while I've got the darker color on my brush, I'm going to add some shadows underneath the bank and then also re-wet my trees so that I can also drop in a bit of shadow on the right hand side of each tree, but make it quite soft. I followed Tom's instructions with the trees on the left bank there and cut around them nicely with the shadow to create this really strong contrast. But I'm going to add a bit more depth and shadow to those as well. And speaking of shadows, I'm now going to paint some cast shadows with a darkened version of my raw umber. Just dropped in a bit of blue into my raw umber. And now it's time to add the shadow on the river with a dark blue. It doesn't have to be all that much darker because now we're glazing, and the second layer will obviously make it darker by default. And painting those cast shadows onto the water. Not quite as masterful as his brushwork, but I'm also painting on a much smaller scale, which makes these things a little bit harder. Same color for the shadow on those rocks in the foreground, and then as mentioned in the introduction, I'm going to drop in some dark brown straight away for it to fuzz a little bit. Once it had dried, I thought I'd try and add some brush marks into the river to get closer to Tom's original, but I made a bit of a hash of it and should have probably done that while I was painting the river, not afterwards. Nevertheless, I think I got really close and I learned a lot from this master study, and I hope you'll have a go as well.